Dear students, this podcast discusses the communication process and also the differences between memos and letters. In a nutshell, the communication process is the sending and receiving of messages. You have the sender, or you, are prompted to send a message, and this prompting can be from your boss, perhaps a phone call or email that you have received. So you're trying to respond to that message or that topic. The message is actually the content, the information that you put in that memo, that letter, whatever the case may be. The medium is how you want to get your message across. So you may think, well, I'll send an email, but perhaps an email is not the correct message for your audience. So you want to make sure that you choose the correct message and then the correct medium to get to your audience. And the receiver would be your audience, and your receiver, your audience, is going to decode your message and get the true understanding from the content of your message. From the receiver, you're going to get feedback, the response from your receiver. So if you sent a memo to all employees about a new healthcare benefit, and you think that you have received, or you think that you have included all the necessary information in that memo, but the feedback that you receive actually is numerous questions about the content in that memo, well, then you know that you didn't do really a good job of communicating this particular topic. And you have to remember that as a receiver and a sender, you are influenced by internal and external stimuli. And I want you to think for a few seconds, what could that internal and external stimuli be? Well, some stimuli could be just attitudes and beliefs about the topic. So let's say that from your personal standpoint, you don't think that a new healthcare benefit is necessary. Well, you're not going to let that, let your opinion influence the way that you write that memo. So you want to make sure that you keep an objective point of view. Remember, objective means that you don't let any outside influences come into play. So it's not opinionated, it's based solely on facts, whereas a subjective point of view would be your opinion. So always for your business writing, you want to make sure that you take an objective point of view. Business communication would be the process of a business sending and receiving messages to stakeholders. And stakeholders would just be your audience. And so these are some of your stakeholders. Of course, you can add more to this list. But these are some of the, the most famous stakeholders that you will write to or communicate with in a business situation. As you have learned by reading chapters 1 and 2, these are some reasons why communication in business is so necessary. And as you can see from this list, the reasons are both positive and negative, and you will have the opportunity to practice writing positive and negative business messages. Now, there are various types of verbal communication, and what I'm going to do here is break down the types of communication, period. So first we have verbal. So we have the face-to-face communication, the phone conversations, and meetings in which there is a voice associated with this type of communication. We also have email messages, and when you think in terms of verbal, you don't only have the voice, but you also have the written word. And when you think solely of voice, that would be oral communication. But verbal entails the voice and also the words, the writing. Then we have nonverbal communication, and this would entail pictures, computers, and company logos. So ponder for a couple of seconds how computers come into play for nonverbal business communication. So let's say that you go to a business and you take a look at the computers that business is using, and you notice that the computers are old, the software that is used is old. Let's say that instead of Office 2007, the business is using Office Millennium. Okay, so there's a big difference between those two software packages. 7 years, difference there. So that could communicate non-verbally that the company that is using Office Millennium is not quite up to speed, and it may take longer to produce documents. Maybe the perception could be that that company does not care about producing documents effectively, that it doesn't care about efficiency. So that can definitely communicate non-verbally a lot about a particular business. And then we have company logos, and of course when you take a look at a logo, well then that logo says so much about that company, and many times you can just take a look at a logo and know which company that logo refers to. So for example, if you see that swish, you know that's a Nike switch. And so you don't need to see that word Nike, because just by looking at that logo, you know exactly who that company, what that logo represents. And then we have pictures. And this picture is from Allstate Insurance. And again, take a few seconds to look at this picture and come up with some ideas about nonverbal communication and what this picture is telling you about Allstate Insurance. So we definitely have a happy group. Everyone is smiling. We also have a very diverse group. So there are numerous nationalities represented here. We also have a pretty good range of ages. Pretty good. Okay, so by looking at this picture, we can see that Allstate Insurance embraces diversity of all types. It also is a welcoming company, and you can trust these employees with your insurance needs. Then we have interpersonal nonverbal communication, and this would entail facial expressions, proximity. So in other words, we go to a company and the supervisor is not on the same floor as his or her employees, or the supervisor has a nice window office and the employees are in cubicles, well then that's saying a lot about that particular organization and how that supervisor sees his or her employees. Office space. And then of course there are numerous benefits of improving communication, and you want to make sure that you think of these benefits as you go forth and write business documents and communicate in business situations. It saves time, makes your efforts more effective. You can communicate your points more clearly. It builds goodwill. You will hear that term or read about that term many times during the next 6 weeks. Okay, there are various types of business documents, but probably the most popular types would be your memo and your letter. So I have here memos versus letters. What are some differences between a memo and a letter? For a memo, it is a document sent to readers within an organization, and that is a key difference. So you would not send a memo to someone who works for a different organization or for a client or a customer. You would send a memo only to people within an organization. So let's say, to make it simple, fellow employees. So therefore it's for an internal audience. And the style also makes a memo different from a letter. And the style, you have the to, from, date, subject arrangement. Remember that a memo does not have a salutation, which would be your dear, like Dear Miss Smith. Closing would be sincerely, and your signature block, in which you would actually sign the documents. A memo does not include these elements. In your book, there are pictures of, or examples of, various types of memos. So this is a memo on plain paper. I ask that any time that you write a memo for this class that you follow the formats in your textbook. So this is a memo on plain paper. This is a memo on letterhead. And if you choose to design letterhead for your documents, that's perfectly fine. I just ask that you use this format for a memo with letterhead. And this would be the second page of a memo format. And then you have your letters, and they are considered more formal than memos. And you would include your salutation, your closing, and your signature block in most cases. And there is an exception to this rule, and we'll get to that in a few seconds here. And a letter is addressed to one reader. And here is an example of a letter on letterhead for a block style format. This really is the easiest format to use for a letter because everything begins at the flush at the left margin. You don't have to indent or anything, so this is probably the most popular and the easiest format for a business letter. Here is the second page for a block format letter. And then you have your modified block, and as you can see, each paragraph is indented. And then we also have alignment of the date, the sincerely, which is the closing, and the signature block. And the second page of a modified block format. Then we have your AMS format, considered the least formal, and this is the format that you used for your letter of inquiry. And this is really the only time in which you would use the AMS format, is for a letter of inquiry. There is punctuation known as open punctuation, and I say to you to never use open punctuation because that refers to using or not using punctuation after the salutation and closing. And when you use open punctuation, it just looks like you forgot to punctuate. So you want to always use punctuation. Okay, so once again, never use open punctuation. Okay, that was an overview of various types of memos and letters in the format, the differences between the two, and also your communication process.